I am going to take the liberty to do a brief introduction of the chair of the Armchair discussion, Dr. Ralph Henry. As I mentioned previously, I believe, Dr. Ralph Henry is a former member of staff of the Department of Economics. He actually joined our Department of Economics on this campus at the very same day that Professor Watson joined. So, colleagues, in arms or otherwise. The Dr. Ralph Henry, when he served on this campus and in this department, he coordinated our graduate program, our MSc program. He also served as chair of the Graduate Studies program for the Faculty of Social Sciences for a while. There is a committee that oversees graduate studies at the level of the faculty, and Dr. Henry chaired that effort for some time. While in our department, he also contributed by way of teaching, undergraduate, postgraduate, but definitely in terms of teaching with distinction in the master's program in economics, and in particular, development economics. Dr. Henry in those days would have also helped to develop our master's program and to reform the program as we went along with other colleagues. He was also in our department when we were transitioning to form some research clusters. And Dr. Henry helped with the thinking through of what those clusters should be. We have now turned those clusters into what we then called research clusters. We ended up calling research units and having different themes. So out of that effort, we had the health economics unit, which over the years transitioned into the HU Center for Health Economics. We had the economic measurement unit, and we had the trade and economic development unit. We also, in terms of Dr. Henry, to tell you a bit more about him, quickly that is, he worked in the region, and he has continued to work in this region, looking at issues pertaining to development, looking at issues pertaining to poverty, looking carefully at the issues pertaining to inequality and inequities across the region, and the manifestation of those. Dr. Henry has the distinction of having worked not just across this region and being known across the region as an expert in development economics, but also having worked and carrying that knowledge to Southern Africa. When he left this department, he continued to visit us as a guest speaker, a guest lecturer at the MSc level for our department, our development economics, and he has continued as Professor Watson. So it means that the department, we have something where people want to contribute, they want to continue giving of themselves and nurturing the young economists. Dr. Henry, to this day, he continues to supervise students in our graduate program and to have PhD students that he is supervising on behalf of the Department of Economics. Dr. Henry, I said short introduction. That's a summary. Whether you believe it or not, that's a summary to the godly man, Dr. Ralph Henry, and he will be chairing the session this morning, the armchair discussion.
Thank you, Chair. And It's almost afternoon, but welcome everybody to this first panel discussion. It's not a panel, but rather an armchair discussion. And I am indeed honored to be invited to chair this session, which is part of the celebration of a long-standing colleague, Patrick Watson. And Patrick Watson and I go back to 1980. We were colleagues, we had fights, but I think listening to Professor Downs this morning, who recounted some of his work, I could see that he learned from that fight. And that in the early days when I, criticized him for just being engaged in measurement and even, pilloried him in that regard, he moved, like Professor Downs, to ensuring that the measurement was always relevant to the issues at hand, even if you couldn't get the hard numbers to determine what are the relationships between one variable and another. So in honoring him, I want to compliment him in having moved in that direction, and you could see in his later work that is all related to issues of that inform policy rather than just simply measuring things and coming up with relationships, some of which might not make sense. We have a very distinguished panel in this first session, and I start with a colleague who, again, I heard Dr. Farrell make mention of dinosaurs, and if there are dinosaurs around, I would be one of them. But I'll also say that Professor Gonzales is also one of them as well, because we were undergraduate students at the same time, doing the same course in 1964. It's a long time ago. And we have next to him Dr. Roger Hosein, who has become well known in pathology, studying Dutch disease. Every time you hear him, somewhere along the line you hear something about Dutch disease. And next to him is Dr. Terrence Farrell, who was once at the Department of Economics when I was not. And I remember his asking me at the time when a position turned up at the central bank, whether he should go to the central bank or whether he should stay in the Department of Economics. And I think I might have been influential in suggesting to him that it would be a good opportunity for him to get close to money by going to the central bank. And maybe the only benefit that he might get there is that he might get an opportunity to sign money, if even he might not make money. I think he did sign, no, I don't think he ever signed money, but he got some insights which I think he will bring to bear on this session, which looks at the economic challenges of the Caribbean, and I think he might focus specifically on Trinidad and Tobago, but that is not only what he sees as his life remit, which is looking at the economic challenges of the Caribbean. And in that regard, he has been well informed by the work of Arthur Lewis, who I want to invite the young people here in particular. People are talking about what has happened in the region in the last few years. Dr. Downs showed it, and we have to be grateful to him, Professor Downs, for his very informative presentation, that we did well for a while as a Caribbean, and then we have seemed to falter and have been faltering. And I keep mentioning the work of Arthur Lewis, who in the 1930s, 100 years ago, looked around and dug deep and came up with policies and approaches for development, which led first to his little book, Labor in the West Indies, which recounts the challenges at the time when the Caribbean, as far as he was concerned, had faltered. 100 years ago. It was the period of the Great Depression of 1929, 1930. And here is a Caribbean man looking at the situation and digging deep and coming up later on with what was technically an approach which was radical at the time of industrialization of the British West Indies. To put industrialization next to British West Indies at the time was indeed a radical thinking. And subsequently he went on to write his famous works, The Economic Development with Unlimited Supplies of Labor, and then The Theory of Economic Growth, which has all the things that Professor Downs talked about this morning: institutions, administration, bureaucracy, technology, all of that is there. He could have gotten the Nobel Prize just on that, but it took time for them to recognize his contribution. And surely we, as a region, need to recognize that contribution and have our young people dig deep. And today we are faced with a situation where we have to dig deep again. And we need all the hands on deck, and more so all heads being knocked together to come up with an approach that will take the Caribbean out of its mess. But that's for our colleagues to show us. And in order of presentation, I think we'll start with Dr. Farrell, who is on my immediate left, who will, I think, has a dashboard. Yes, so we will start with a dashboard, and usually it's good when you have a dashboard so you can see where you're going and how things are ticking over. So I invite Dr. Farrell, who I told you is a distinguished economist in his own right, who has in fact revisited the work of Lewis and has, I suppose, been inspired by his work, Lewis's work in dealing with the problems of the Caribbean, and more particularly now with the problems of Trinidad and Tobago. So I would now to invite Dr. Farrell. You prefer to come here? Yes, since you have a flash drive. So I'll invite you to come. Since we don't have very much time, I will cut in if I feel that they're going on for too long and getting into too much of the disease.